It's Wednesday, April 9th. We're here with the Dartmouth Board of Health. It is 4:15. I'm going to open the meeting with a roll call. So Emily Michelle Olmsted is present.
Richard Romero is present.
Susan Murray is present.
Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go through the agenda. So we're in section 1, which is new business. Item A, which is reorganization of the board, annual appointments, and operational policies. Chris, do you want to speak on this and remind us like what the proper order is or even what the items are?
Sure, thank you. For the record, Christopher Michaud, Director of Public Health. So this is an annual agenda item that occurs following each election. The board reorganizes and selects a chair, a vice chair, and because of a town bylaw in which we have a soil conservation board, in which the bylaw prescribes the composition of that board, the Board of Health has to select one representative to participate in that public body. Additionally, we just have some annual appointments that we make or designations for the animal health inspectors, for the annual bond books, and rabies. Also for the carrying out the duties of the board with the agent, the director, public health nurse, and if any of the boards want to serve as, board members want to serve as agents. As a board member, you are one of 3. There may be times when a board member may want to participate as an agent of the board, and that is something that we have done historically. Not all members, some members don't feel easy with it, some members feel fine with it, and that's all.
Okay, and remind me, our step here with each of these is going to be to nominate someone and then to make a motion that we all agree on. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Okay. Do my other board members have any questions of Chris or anyone before we begin?
I do not.
No.
All right, so for the selection of the chair and the vice chair of the board, I'm going to move to nominate myself. I'm the longest member on the board, and I'm comfortable trying to be the chair.
And I second that motion.
All right, can you please state your vote now, Richard Romero
I vote yes.
and Susan Murray?
I vote yes.
And Emily Michelle Olmsted votes yes. All right, and now for the vice chair of the board, do we have a nomination?
I'll nominate myself, being the second longest tenured, I guess.
All right, I will second the motion to have Richard Romero as vice chair. Okay, and so now we will vote. Richard Romero, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Susan Murray, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Emily Michelle Olmsted votes yes. Excellent. All right, so for the annual appointments, I move, I don't think we need nominations for these. Okay. I move to approve the following as animal health inspectors: Sandra Goslin, Stacy Rebello Hardy, Tracy Martin, and Christopher Michaud. Can I have a second?
I second the motion.
All right, and now we will vote. Richard Romero, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Susan Murray, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Emily Michelle Olmsted votes yes. Okay. 2B, which is health and sanitary inspectors. I move to have Donna Farias, Ariel Enos, and Ali Amaral as health and sanitary inspectors. Can I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, and now we will vote. Richard Romero, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Susan Murray, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Emily Michelle Olmsted votes yes. Okay. For the Director of Public Health, I move to have Christopher Michaud as the Director of Public Health. Can I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
All right, and now we will vote. Richard Romero, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Susan Murray, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Emily Michelle Olmsted votes yes. All right, for our public health nurse, I move to have Maura Raymer, and, those are her credentials. Can I have a second, please?
I'll second the motion.
All right, and now we will vote. Richard Romero, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
And Susan Murray, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Emily Michelle Olmsted votes yes. And then as far as board members, I personally don't see any issue with, even if we have ourselves as board members, it just gives us that chance, even if we don't take advantage of it. So I move to have Emily Michelle Olmsted, Richard Romero, and Susan Murray as agents of the Board of Health. Can I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
All right, and now we will vote. Richard Romero, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Susan Murray, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Emily Michelle Olmsted votes yes. Okay. We're going to move on to new business 1, which is section A, 40B application known as Sherbrooke Farms, aka Pine Hill Sand and Gravel, Plat 48, Lot 29 at 498 Old Westport Road. We don't have quite an applicant for this. Chris, would you like to start us off?
Sure, thank you. So this item is on the board's agenda because of a process for affordable housing applications by the state of Massachusetts. A lot of people have heard the term 40B. 40B is a statute that allows for applicants to propose affordable housing in communities that have not reached 10%. At this time, Dartmouth does not have 10% listed by the state. So when a 40B application wants to go from a concept to, a 40B project wants to go from a concept to actually filing an application, there's a process that's prescribed in 760 CMR 56. And that process requires the applicant to submit to the Mass Housing, and then Mass Housing notifies us of the project, and the town, through its boards, have an opportunity to present any concerns with the project as Mass Housing reviews it for a project eligibility letter. And I'm sorry I'm a little bit broken in this, because this isn't a process that I'm ordinarily familiar with, because we don't administer it, it's administered by Mass Housing. If the project receives a PEL, which is a project eligibility letter, then it would proceed to filing with the Board of Appeals. So within 760 CMR 56, there are some things that I've looked at that I believe that this board should bring to the attention of Mass Housing as it relates to the site. The site is serviced by public water supply and public sewer. So we don't have any regulations in that respect as we would if it was on a septic system or on a lot-by-lot basis like we had some 40Bs about 20 years ago. The one set of regulations that we have that they have not requested exemption from in their submission to Mass Housing is our land development and reuse regulations. Those are unique regulations, as I believe, to Dartmouth, and unlike that of the rest of the 350 communities, only exist here. We put those regulations in place here in Dartmouth because of our knowledge of how housing was transitioning in the South Coast as we were building out, and developers were looking away from raw forested and agricultural lands to former industrial sites. And we know that with the 1970s came a point in time when government, state and federal government, recognized a need to regulate solid waste and hazardous waste. So it wasn't until around 1974 where we started to see those first regulations. Prior to that, we call areas where they put refuse dumping grounds. And we say refuse and not solid waste because it was just co-mixed. We don't know what was in it. Now we have regulations that require oil and hazardous waste to be dealt with in one manner, solid waste in another. The applicant, if they get their PEL, can request waivers from any local regulation at any point in time during the application process. So while they haven't requested an exemption from our land development reuse regulations, the option is on the table. Why do I mention that? Because my review of town records and other staff's review of town records points to a concern with certain industrial uses, and sand and gravel pits are one of them. We know that sand and gravel pits that were in existence prior to the 1970s were in some cases used as disposal areas where they dug shafts deeper in the ground when the water table receded in the dry season. And then they would fill that with refuse. We've seen that in one of the most recent sites that was subject to our land development and reuse regulations. They don't have to request an exemption, but if they acquiesce to our regulations, they would have to do what is called an ASTM Phase 1 and Phase 2. ASTM Phase 1 and Phase 2 would require them to undertake an investigation of the site and look in areas that have been mined including areas beneath large fill piles, and to conduct borings to test for oil and hazardous materials that are expected in historic dumping grounds. We do know that this site, 498 Old Westport Road, was used as a dumping ground in the 70s. I remember hearing years ago about a beer dump out there. And I stumbled upon a record of this town when I was undertaking a major record review about 7 or 8 years ago that confirmed that, yes, Rheingold Beers disposed of beer at Pine Hill Sand and Gravel with the permission of Paul T. Anderson from the Mass Department of Public Health at the time, when even environmental regulations were encompassed within DPH, and then DEQE started and DEQE became DEP. So we do know that. I also know that in 2001 that there was an instance in which foundry sand was brought to the property and discovered by the Board of Health, and they were ordered to remove the foundry sand. There wasn't any testing that was provided to us that proved that that foundry sand was approved by DEP to be accepted. Foundry sand can be acceptable and it can be problematic, but we don't know. But we also know that while Pine Hill Sand and Gravel was in operation up until the early 2000s, maybe 2005, 6, the date is a little fuzzy, they operated under an exemption in the state's solid waste regulations that allowed them to take asphalt, brick, and concrete rubble with a mere registration. So they could bring in all this material so long as they would process it within a certain amount of time. But unfortunately, the exemption doesn't provide for a lot of oversight, and they accumulated about 60,000 cubic yards of this rubble upon closing of the operation. So this rubble sits on the property. The concern I've always had with this sort of exemption is that there's no financial assurance mechanism to provide for the cleanup. You bring the material in, you take the money, and if you don't put it aside for the processing, eventually it can blight the property. And I believe that's the case because when you look at the purchase price of this property, it was for $650,000 for over 80 acres of land. Now granted, the majority of it is wet, but for the amount of frontage and 12 or so acres of upland along most of that frontage, $650,000 to me seems like a bargain unless there's some other underlying issue. So I believe concerns need to be raised to Mass Housing during this period of time in which we have to provide comments. I believe it is until the end of April. Those concerns that are applicable to this board but not directly administered are the state's solid waste regulations with respects to the asphalt, brick, and concrete. There is an open release site. We know that there was some underground storage tanks on the property and that they leaked and impacted the environment. That still needs to see closure status by Mass DEP, and that has not happened. So we've got the major solid waste issue that needs to be addressed. We've got the open release site status that needs to be addressed. And apparently that, has not begun, and that's a concern of mine because those are significant costs associated with the project. We know that when you try to test pit, and they've reported to us that they've performed a number of test pits in that asphalt, brick, and concrete to try to determine if it is suitable for processing, crushing down to an exempt size for reuse. It's a forecast because the composition of that pile could be 10 trucks from the same source and then 2 trucks from different sources. So it's a bit of a forecast. So I wouldn't take 27 clean holes to say that all that concrete is not coated, unpainted, uncoated, unpainted, or unimpregnated. And why I say those 3 terms is you cannot crush coated, painted, or impregnated concrete. Coated could have lead paint, painted could have lead paint, coated could have asbestos, and impregnated and I'm not being exclusive of all the concerns, impregnated could be PCB caulking that they used widely in the 70s that would seep into the concrete. We know that UMass Dartmouth knocked down a dormitory that was problematic with the PCB caulking, and they had to gouge it out. Fortunately, they tested. But, I'm not sure what the stewardship was when Pine Hill was in operation, so we don't know. So I would ask the board, for guidance on, the board doesn't need to take a vote. If we want the board to sign it, we can. I can sign it on behalf of the board without a vote. To consider concerns with the project as it relates to the vast volume of ABC on site, the uncertainty as to how they tend to handle it. And why I say uncertainty is while the applicant can say that they want to process it on site, that ultimate decision to process it on site is made by Mass DEP. And part of that decision has to consider air pollution, which would be the generation of dust and noise. Also the open release site, and also the uncertainty with our knowledge of historic uses of sand and gravel pits for the disposal of waste materials during a time in which they were not regulated. And that's all.
Great. At this point, I want to open up questions from the board members, and I do want to hear from the folks who are here as well. Richard Romero, do you have any questions?
Yeah. What does open release site actually mean? I might have lost that.
So open use site, sorry about that. That is a term within the state's regulations, 310 CMR 40, that pertain to oil and hazardous materials. So if you say it's an open site, it means it's still somewhere between being discovered and then closing out where it's now in compliance with those
I
regulations.
see. Okay. And now, is the buyer to assume the cleanup and the removal, or perhaps the removal of the contaminants?
So as new owners, they now become responsible for it.
Okay. Okay.
And that is managed strictly by DEP.
DEP? Okay. Yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Susan Murray, questions?
I have no questions.
Thank you. Okay. At this point, we're going to open it up. Am I correct that that microphone does work in the center there? That is where they should speak? They have to speak? Excellent. And I'll ask, please state your name and your address for the record if possible. I'm not sure if you want to come one at a time. I think that's perfectly fine. Yeah.
If I go first? Would you mind if I go first, Clara? Okay. I know. I know. That's why you're sitting there.
Do you need us to speak a little bit more loudly and clearly? Is that better?
Not the loudness.
Okay.
I have state-of-the-art hearing aids. It's the fact that the sound goes this way and doesn't reach my ears in a way that I understand the words that you're saying. It will help to talk slower.
Slowly.
There's not a whole lot we can do about it.
Sounds good. We will, I'll try and keep in mind to please talk slowly for this audience member.
Okay,
Thank you.
Jim Costa, 459 Old Westport Road. And I'm one of the people who applied for to the state, as well as many people in this room, for the public involvement plan on the cleanup of that site. And we worked with Chris was there, licensed site professional on this, and we sat down, we met at UMass Dartmouth to discuss some issues. And so I want to just back up and get you a little history of this place. And so the records from the town go back to 1925, but I'm sure it was excavated before that, years before. That is all flat and level, all the way from Old Westport Road out to almost Route 6 in the ledge. The water flow, springs flow south to north to the contaminated well that we have now on Route 6 Dartmouth. Pinelli's over there. So he excavated, all that property's been excavated right to the property lines. I mean, within 50 feet of the property lines, even less. And after he dredged out the whole, the pit down to the water table, he started excavating water with a crane and a shovel and digging 75-foot deep ponds. And I think the town eventually shut them down in the mid-'80s for mining the gravel below water table. So the whole site is down to the water table, all the way out north, and to the property lines, where after he ran out of gravel from the site, he approached the neighbors and started asking if he could dig on their property, with the promise of grading the land and topsoil and seeding it, and that never happened. Right. So he's got a history of not following the rules, so to speak. Now, I guess if you check into it, the soil board has no records where he applied for any of this digging. So you can check on the soil board records, but last time I checked, he had nothing. He was doing it all on his own. Now, this is a Zone 2 aquifer, as Chris had mentioned. So on this site, there's some prohibited uses. Storage of sludge, septic tank, and leaching waste. Well, there used to be later on, after we ran out of soil and he mined and he got shut down by the town for excavating, he said he was going into the landscaping business. He got a huge pile of wood chips, and he was going to use that for landscaping, but he mixed it with sludge, which is not allowed on a Zone 2 place. He mixed it in with the sludge, and the neighbors complained about the smell. We called Chris, and we recorded the dates and times and all that. I think eventually he threw some lime on top of the sludge and the wood chips, and they caught into a fire. They were smoking and all that. So the fire department had to go out there, cut the chain, and go in. Storage of hazardous and flammable toxic fluids. He had underground storage tanks from the 50s, above storage ground tanks from all over the different years. So that's prohibited. Garage floor drain system. So he has 2 garages there with floor drains that go right into the ground. We'll find out, I guess, where they go. But he has 2 of those floor drains, which is prohibited. Commercial industrial discharge of water to the ground. Well, he used to hose down his trucks right onto the site, and that would all go into the ground. Galvanized bare metal roofs. No, they weren't bare. I think they were painted. Waste oil retention facility. So in the front 2 garages, when he built the back garage, he was supposed to tear down that, but he didn't tear down that. Zoning Board of Appeal never enforced that, I guess. But he had storage tanks of oil. He had tanker trucks in the front garage. Eventually, one of the storms blew the south wall out into the road, and the town had to clean that one up. So, yes, so that's what, just a little history of this property. So just picture, there's no gravel left. He's taken it down to the water table during the dry season. And then to the east, that was 6 inches of water usually during the wet season. And maybe it's dried down. If you was to stand there, you would start to sink. It's settling. Whatever's buried in there on the east side, I don't know. Okay, so when they were doing the initial cleanup from the first, I think this is the 4th developer, or the 3rd or the 4th developer that wants to build something in there. When he was doing the first developer asked to have an environmental engineer come down, and that's when they did all the site. And you might have the information. If you don't, I can give you the link to the DEP. Okay. And you can go through all those records. So here's where it stood a few weeks ago. Approach the bench.
Go ahead.
Let me get a few copies here. This is the letter from the DEP.
We can share if you need. Oh, okay.
Yeah. To the owner of the new owner of the property, because the DEP didn't know there was a new owner. This transaction apparently, I don't know, went under the table or something. So in there, it outlines all the how many years they've been in non-compliance with the cleanup. And they gave them a 5-year extension. They didn't do anything. And then they sold it to the new owner. And I don't know what's going to happen with that. But so that was non-compliance for over 5 years. I just got the latest thing from the DEP website is cleanup plan. You can respond.
So that, because they had an April 17th.
This happened today.
Okay. I have not seen that. You can keep that, sir, Mr. Costa, because I can just get that offline.
Okay.
Thank you. Unless you want to.
Okay. Well, I'll leave it for the quote. There you go. So he's responded to that January 17th letter that they're all reading there. Okay, so the groundwater is a concern too, because we have the Pinelli Wells off to the right there. The water flow, and you might see it in your paperwork somewhere if you go through digging, the water flow is to the north, which heads right to the Route 6 well. It's the groundwater flow, which heads right to the Route 6 well, which is shut down for contamination, with the Pinelli off to the right. And if that's because it's a Zone 2 area, if we run into a dry spell or a drought for 180 days, if the town starts pumping, they can be pulling water from this area. Okay, this is the stuff that's in the groundwater. Those chemicals are in the groundwater. Some of that might be diesel fuel, it might be other chemicals. There's also heavy metals in the soil, which Chris talked about, foundry dust. The way they get rid of foundry dust, they take it to the pit, they drive around with the dump trucks, pouring it here and there, and the trucks grind it into the soil. That's how they get rid of it. So that soil is contaminated with foundry dust. Ooh, get some copies here. All right, so these are the heavy metals. Now, on the board, on the PIP committee, we asked to have what are they going to do about some of these heavier metals, and if this is in the water or in the ponds? And they didn't have a response back then, but I don't know. That needs to be checked out, see where that stuff is. So the heavy metals that's where the foundry dust, so that confirms it all. And as I say, the way they get rid of it, they pour it on the bottom of the pit, and you just grind it in with the trucks when they operate back and forth. The things that were not discussed or had chance to discuss because they didn't finish the cleanup, so they probably didn't pay the licensed site professional to finish the job to the full impact of cleaning up the area.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. It's not done? Is that what you said?
It's not done.
Okay.
It's hazardous. I don't see how the state can want to build anything in there.
And it goes back to the open release site. It's still open. It hasn't worked.
That's right. Okay, yeah.
you.
Thank you. So, so my concern is, because they tested mainly for the liquids in the water, I'm concerned about the concrete pillars, the dust, and whatever else he buried in there, because we don't know. They didn't test to the right-hand side of the driveway, that eastern portion. That's where he took it down to the water table, then a little bit more, and then he filled it in with stuff. I don't know what. So looking at the concrete, and Chris mentioned other materials are, I don't know the term you use, but back in the day when they first started building highway overpasses, they used to, back in the 50s or whatever, before 1980 when asbestos was bound, they used to reinforce concrete with asbestos. So I'm concerned, if he starts making dust, all this is going to go into the air. So when he first tried to get rid of that concrete with the reinforcement, he put it into his stone crusher machine. The rebar wrapped around the blades, and it ruined his machine. Then he set up with an excavator with a hydraulic jackhammer on it, and he tried to break up the concrete. He would stay out there, close himself in the cab. I don't know if he had a respirator on, but he'd close himself, and he would just hammer away trying to break that up until he broke that too. That's when the stuff is just piled up around now. I don't know if it's from one site or more than one site, that concrete, but all those records were destroyed when the office caught fire one night. And the building where the scalers used to be the office. And we don't know where you got it from. So I'm concerned about the concrete. I wish the concrete could be tested to make sure that there's no asbestos in that stuff, because once he starts hammering away, so they could set up water cannons or something to put a water shield or something. So I believe that stuff needs to be tested. The sludge pile needs, if you walk the site, you go to the right, and towards the middle, it looks like a topsoil. It's the wood chips after 10 or 15 years with sludge mixed in and whatever else is in there. I'd like to see that sludge pile tested. Walking by, he had ponds against the front of the property. He dug those ponds right against the front of the property to the town road. You can see part of the road has started to cave in where he's dug right up to the town line. Around with the guardrails, you can see the road separating a little bit. Okay, so he had that all water. He had ponds along the front because he excavated all that out, all the way to both sides. There used to be 3 ponds to the right. He filled them all in with something, I don't know what, but I know the ones on the left, he filled in with demolition material. So I'm looking at asphalt, I'm looking at timbers, look like milled stuff. So we don't know what's buried underneath all those boulders that he put on top of that stuff in what used to be pond. Okay, safety, of course, the traffic, okay. Yeah, safety. So this is a bike route. You got skateboards, rollerblades, electric scooters cutting in and around, dog walkers, joggers, pedestrian deaths. So in his report on that, his initial report that he's turned into the town, I guess, he mentions car accidents, but he doesn't mention pedestrian deaths. I think there were 2 on Old Westport, and I think there's serious deaths or injuries on Chase Road. The public involvement plan people, we kind of negotiated to have the records so people could access them that don't have computers at the North Dartmouth Library. So in the North Dartmouth Library, behind the desk, up on the shelf, there's 3 white binders, and you can look at the information there, or anybody who wants to look at that information, it's there. But it's not a full set of all the records. And then liability. I don't know. Researching this stuff, I ended up going to the Love Canal, if you're not old enough to know about this, but the Love Canal, Niagara, New York. Okay, contaminated site. They built houses right on top. 800 families, and you go into birth defects, leukemia, you get all these cancers and all that stuff. And the way it happened was the water table was, on a wet season, the water table rose, the gases worked its way into the cracks of the foundation, and there were gases, toxic gases in there. And then the liquid came to the surface too, and the kids were playing in it. But anyway, that's why I just like to make sure it's safe before you start building anything like this, huh? And that's what I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go for it.
Clara Barlow, and I own the property on the east and north sides of the pit. That property is mostly wetlands. I bought the house and the property, I think in 1952. So I have lived out there for 70 years. And I could stay here probably for hours telling you things that have happened in the pit from my husband and my kids and the neighborhood kids. it's not a safe place. My concern is the wetlands. I believe that they're very important to the town of Dartmouth because of the water. And Dartmouth needs to protect as much as their wetlands as they can to make sure that they have water for the years to come. And I would like to make sure that everything that can be done to protect my wetlands, but also which you have an interest in, are protected to the full extent. The other thing I would like to add is even after 1970, there's all kinds of things buried in that sand pit, not just the things that Jim told you about. We would hear noises in the sand pit at night, see lights, pickup trucks, hear voices, and shovels digging sand, and call the police. The police would come a half hour or an hour later. Of course, the trucks were gone, and the police's answer is, it's private property. We can't go on there. It's funny, I have private property, and everybody goes on it. It's funny. But there's all kinds of things. In fact, I could probably show you exactly where a big animal was buried, a horse or a cow, that I watched them buried 9 o'clock at night. Neighbors, people around have buried all kinds of things in there. But nevertheless, there's also a natural pond. And if you go through the history of that natural pond, there have been several catastrophes. And I don't think that's a safe place to build apartments that are going to be filled with children. And my last comment is, it's a hole in the ground, a huge, humongous hole in the ground. That's all you can call it. And on a hot, humid, breathless August day, it's going to be like living in a sewer. I don't think it's the proper place to build. Okay, next.
Would anyone else like to speak? No? Go ahead.
Brian Medeiros, 515 Old Westport Road. I live right across the street. Seen a lot of things going on over there over the years, including that bear situation. But my concern, of course, that's all past. My concern, of course, is the demolition material that is there now. What are they going to do with that? Is that staying on site? Is it going to be trucked off site? Where is it going? This is something that's, you can't move hazardous material from one site to another without some questionings. Of course, you know, we've been eating dust over there for many, many years. This town was notified of many problems, many times that I called. And it was always overlooked. So does the town have a little responsibility here? Yeah, I think so. But that's kind of water under the bridge. Because we live in an aquifer, I have restrictions on my property. Well, how come there's no restrictions over there? And now you're gonna be building something that really nobody wants. I think there's more to this, that the town should be able to force the state that this is not a good site. Leave it alone. Leave the site alone. You don't want to poke the bear, because that bear, that's the stuff that I'm breathing, and all of the rest of us that we've been breathing this stuff for years. You start moving that around, I think we're going to have a big, big problem. Just like we had a big problem at the, not too many weeks ago at Sears and Roebuck, and all the dust over there. But that's another site. My other concern is the infrastructure of this town. The septic, the sewer, is that there's a pressurized main there. Can that handle it? Can the treatment plant handle the extra sewage? I understand there's another site on Route 6, a 200-plus unit apartment place that's kind of in limbo right now. I have no idea why that's in limbo, but it seems to be in limbo. And I understand there's a couple more housing projects, one just near the ledge, right behind Dunkin' Donuts. Is there another project going on over there? Yes. They're going to be using the town sewer?
It would, yes,
Imagine
sewer
that.
is available.
Okay, so, and then there's another project somewhere off of Bakerville Road?
Bakerville? That's ongoing, I believe. There's a subdivision.
Okay. So all these subdivisions are coming into our sewage treatment plant. This puts a major concern for all the taxpayers of the town of Dartmouth. Because the more that, you know this 40B thing, we're never going to meet that number. You put more houses, that number just, it never works. It's not a really, and you know that, and we know it. We've been this route many, many times. But it's up to you guys to put it in writing to the state, stating that this site is not a recommended site. You got other sites in town that are ongoing. I think you should be concerned with. I mean, with using the sewage system, the water. I mean, we don't have enough water in this town. You guys know that. I mean, they just dug another well behind my house. That's not going to supply the town. We're going to just keep buying more and more water from the town, city of New Bedford. It doesn't make us very. It's just not. It puts us in a real bad situation. Then we have to keep buying stuff from the city of New Bedford. Well, anyhow, my concern, of course, is the dust and everything else that we're going to be dealing with. I don't want this site to be disturbed. And I think it's just going to have a major impact on everybody around in this area, in my generalized area, and for the town of Dartmouth also. It's up to you guys to write a nice letter to the state. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak from the audience? thank you. I definitely have a couple of questions, so I'm going to ask them probably of Chris. So, and I'll summarize it from what I'm hearing, and you certainly seem to all know the history far better than I do, and so thank you for enlightening us with that. There's clearly a pattern of not following regulations and dumping a number of concerning things that are on the site, which potentially are impacting you currently, not to mention could impact a future establishment of apartment buildings. And so I did hear a lot of similar ones that Chris was kindly laid out for us in advance. So the foundry sand, the history of dumping, the concrete concerns. A quick question for Chris. This system is on sewer, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, because we have I know from past septic plans that we've seen, we talk about our local regulation to wetlands, which again, I do know that this is 40B housing, but this would be on sewer.
That is correct.
Thank you. And then a quick question for you, Chris. For the treatment plant, it's the DPW that knows about flow and not our office. Can you speak on capacity, perhaps?
Yeah, that is correct. So the DPW, so as, I'll give you a little bit more, unfortunately, than you bargained for, but I think it'll help provide some clarity on some of these other issues that were mentioned.
Please.
By the public. We're here tonight as, Board of Health to discuss this, to see if the board wants to present a letter to Mass Housing with respects to the board's focus, which is public health, solid waste, hazardous waste, air quality. When it comes to things like the treatment plant, that is a conversation I hear quite often about the town's capacity and the ability of the infrastructure. And all of the departments are aware of this project. And, a department like the DPW, whose mission is not only the roads, but the drinking water and the wastewater, they'll be providing those specific comments on that. We would be kind of stepping outside of our expertise, and it's really best, in my opinion, that, we stay within our focus group, because it can start to get muddy if we start to get out of it, and then it's going to distract from our focus, which I believe we have some really important points that have to be raised to Mass Housing. So, in the case of the wetlands, that would be the Town of Dartmouth Conservation Commission, that I know their staff is reviewing it, and I believe they're going to be presenting a letter to the Select Board to forward to Mass Housing.
Okay, thank you. And so probably our best course of action, if I understand, is to write a letter. We'll talk about who signs it in just a second, but we write a letter to Mass Housing outlining all of our concerns, such as the ones that you outlined, and then if we as a board either want to exclude some or include others, that is really our best next course of action. Is that correct?
That is correct. I believe the board presents the facts, and we're in round one of this, which is the Mass Housing and the project eligibility letter that is needed to then proceed with an application to the Board of Appeals. If they get the project eligibility letter, there are certainly some things that this office would participate in with that application process, as we have done on other projects that had a complicated environmental history, with trying to work with the town's special counsel to try to put some controls in place to address that. And I have to say try, and that's for another chapter of this project. You have to, we're here tonight talking about a letter to Mass Housing so that they can consider this board's concerns, if they have any, when Mass Housing considers issuing a PEL, a project eligibility letter, that is needed for the project to advance to the Board of Appeals. And the only thing I just want to just kind of back up, just to provide some clarity, because there may be some people that are listening and totally unfamiliar. There was a lot of history presented by on the site today. And I just want to make it clear that when we talk about the history of the site, that is about the former owners of the property. It is not about Shorebrook with respects to the mining of the material, the foundry sand. The current owner took possession of the property only within the last few months, as I understand it. They did get that notice of responsibility earlier in the winter. It's spring now. And they did submit that document today to Mass DEP ahead of the deadline. I believe it was April 17th in that notice of responsibility. 15th? Okay, sorry about that. Certainly, we'll get into much more discussion on hazardous waste, former uses. Is the current testing scheme that's out there and former testing scheme, was that comprehensive enough? That really will be if there is a 40B application. I think the fact that we have knowledge that pits, sand and gravel pits were used as disposal sites is enough information to warrant some questioning of, is that enough? And is there financial uncertainty with this project? We don't know. I can't say yay, I can't say nay, but I can say that we have history of disposal at sand and gravel sites, including this one, with what we know was the beer, but was there anything else? We've got a site on Chase Road where we didn't have any record. They submitted to our land development and reuse regulations as they were required to do because it wasn't an exempt project, and we found waste materials.
Okay, thank you. Can you come to the mic again, just so everyone can hear you? Thank you so much.
The past developer that was looking into the property, when they were doing testing and found some flaws in the soil, are those tests going to be submitted to the state in this application? Because what do they call that? You know that.
What, licensed site professional?
No, the
Rayum was the guy's name.
yeah, Rayum was the, yeah.
Prime Engineering.
Yeah, will those be submitted to the, because I'm sure that you guys got some copies from Prime Engineering on that, on their findings. And they know that they found some bad stuff in there, so that's why they didn't develop it. So is that, those findings going to be submitted to the state also? I guess that's what I'm saying. Or is this company going to do their own test bores and send those tests, test samples to the state?
So that's a great question. So, government in today's day and age is very complicated. We're all divided up into our silos. Unfortunately, sometimes the silos, the bigger the government gets, the harder it is for those silos to kind of dovetail together. I don't know of Mass Housing integrating Mass DEP into their routine operations, with the PEL. But if we're aware of it, that is something that we can certainly call to Mass Housing's attention if the board submits a letter.
Well, it's definitely something that has to be, it can't be ignored. The state Mass Housing, they got to be talking to DEP, and DEP's got to be talking to you, and everyone that's involved with this has got to be talking on the same page, not, and then not finding out about this stuff later on. I mean, if those bores came back a few years ago clean, they would have already been built, what they wanted to build in there. So there's got to be something that they found that they wouldn't let them build. So are those the property of Prime Engineering, or were those given to the town for their? I'm sure that you must have some
Yeah, I can answer that. So a number of years ago, I want to say, it might have been 2017, the proponent of the off-campus student housing
Yeah, that was
did
one
meet with
thing.
the select board and made a statement to the select board about the findings that the environmental conditions that were found by their environmental professional, which was Prime Engineering, who was working for the applicant. And because those findings didn't rise to a certain level, and the applicant or the proponent of the off-campus student housing was not the owner, they weren't bound to share that with notify the state. If the owner was in custody, there is an obligation to notify. So following that meeting, we did have an internal meeting the very next day, and I called up Prime Engineering, and Prime Engineering gave us those results, and I put a letter together and sent it to then Deputy Regional Commissioner Gerard Martin, which then triggered the notice of responsibility. So, that was the initial release, and then notice of responsibility to then the Mello family and whatever the ownership was in the deed. And then that's when there was something mentioned earlier about the PIP, the public information process, and that followed. And then my recollection is that a financial inability was submitted by the Mello family, and that kind of put the whole thing into dormancy. That is a process that's allowed by DEP. Those are DEP regulations. So that's allowed if they did do that financial inability. But then once it transferred, the inability goes, if they did a financial inability, that does go away and then reopens it.
So does this new applicant, is he required to do some test bores on that before anything is done?
At this point in time, there is an obligation as part of the mass contingency plan, the 31040 regulations, to bring that property to closure. Part of that closure is filing enormous amounts of digital paper with possibly additional testing. My concern is that's about one particular aspect of the property, which is the underground storage tanks that leaked. That's why I mentioned the importance of our land development reuse regulations that we have as a local Board of Health. And it would be nice to see those regulations stand. But unfortunately, the 40B process allows the developer to say, I want that waiver at any time. We only ask with our regulations that they conduct what is called an ASTM Phase 1 and 2. A Phase 1 is a paper study. A Phase 2 is to investigate that property in the soil and the groundwater against past uses for expected contaminants across areas where you would expect those contaminants to be. And that's what our regulations prescribe in a really condensed version.
So
But
because
they may just request a waiver if we get to
because
the
they're
40.
going through the state for this, like those other applicants that you said, they didn't choose to go with a 40B application. So this is a totally different than those others. Those were private. That dormitory thing was private. The other one with Prime Engineering, when they found the tanks, which they still did nothing with that. They took the tanks away, but they just buried all the dirt right back into the hole. So all that contaminants is still in the ground over there. They never removed the soil, and this is this is a concern. They start moving that material around. I mean, they're not that far. I mean, I'm not too sure by the crow flies, but it's maybe, let's see, I'm just trying to figure out my distance from my property to the town well, which is about 800 feet. So they're about 1,000 feet from the town well. Not the aquifer, we're actually talking about the town well. So I mean, and then you got your ponds that even closer. If that soil, if that contaminant is still in that soil, and that starts getting moved around, you know, I mean, I think it's just gonna stir up a pot. That's what I think. I'm not too sure how you guys made out there, down in Bliss Corner when they had when they found a whole bunch of hazardous material down in Bliss Corner. Did that ever get resolved? And who paid for that? Is the town going to be responsible for some of this? You know, I don't know. I'm just curious. I got the mic, so I ask. So, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Norman De Silva, 523 and 527 Old Westport Road. Brian touched on everything. Basically, more or less what I was going to talk about. But I do remember the gentleman from Prime Engineering stating in public record at one of those meetings that they admitted that there was leakage of toxic or bad materials into the soil. And his answer to that was, yeah, but it's flowing the wrong way. It's not flowing towards the wells. It's flowing towards the wetlands. I believe, I mean, I'm getting old, but I'm pretty sure that's the way he explained it. And I saw him out of business one time and asked him, and he said the same thing, that it was flowing in the other direction. I don't know anything about wetlands, but it doesn't sound like a good deal for the town. It doesn't sound good for our wetlands. And again, like Brian says, once you start turning this stuff over, who knows what the hell is going to happen. And I know you guys can't work miracles, and I know we're trying to keep the scope where it belongs with you guys. But we would appreciate it, anything you can do to stop this. It would be a disaster for our area. There's enough toxic problems over there. I would be willing to bet that if you check at the people that have gotten cancer in our area, close to that place, I bet you the ratio would be very, very high compared to where it is in other parts of the town. And I think you owe that to the people in Dartmouth and to the people on Old Westport Road to try to do whatever you can to help us. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, I just have a question. I actually have several questions, but we'll start with this one. It sounds like there's maybe a history with these soil borings. Is that something that we could ask for if we were to move forward with this letter, to have the Mass Housing Authority really examine any past records that they have, or would that be part of the process?
You know, as I looked at those regulations that they review the project under, the 760 CMR 56, they're really looking at it from the lens of more housing in communities that have under the 10%. There are a couple issues that are within a certain section, you know, and some of those reside with other jurisdictions of the town. So, you know, they talk, you know, and one of them is, I think it's about, you know, is it fitting with the neighborhood? I don't believe that's a public health issue. I'm not saying it might not be a discussion point of another board. But where they talk, they do mention in the environment, but as I've looked at it and read it, I believe the focus on the environment is about wetlands. I'll use the word environmental investigation. When we use that term, when I use that term, unfortunately, I'm kind of talking on a technical side. It's looking for oil or hazardous materials impacts on the environment from anthropogenic sources, man-made. But where they really get into and with the project eligibility is the financial side of it. And where I look at the financial side of it is if there's 60,000 cubic yards of asphalt, brick, and concrete rubble, and Mass DEP has not given any decision on how that material will be managed, that must be managed for this project, or any project, then how do we know what the finances are for this project? Because, you know, I was running numbers partially this morning on what it would cost to manage that material on-site and off-site. And if DEP is the decision maker on that, and they are, I think for my professional opinion is how does Mass Housing issue a PEL without knowing how that waste material, the asphalt, brick, and concrete, will be managed by DEP's prescription? Because if it's got to be managed off-site, you're talking about massive numbers. Because it's going to have to get loaded, put in a truck, and driven somewhere that is appropriate to receive it. And when you start bringing in concrete that's laden with rebar, the price per ton to dump it at a proper facility is extraordinarily expensive, $20 and $28 a ton. And what are we looking at in terms of tonnage? 1.3, 1.4 tons per cubic yard. So 60,000 times 1.4, 1.3 if you want to really, bring the number a little bit lower. That's a lot of money. That's just the tipping fee at the gate. If DEP prescribes that, they're the ones that will prescribe that. If they don't prescribe it, then how are they going to manage dust and noise? And then all of the other things that, we've talked about with the unknowns of the use of the property as it relates to oil and hazardous waste. So, sorry if I answered a little more.
No, thank you. There's certainly a lot to take in with this. So I have to say, I'll just comment to my fellow board members. I don't think that I have any doubt that I think we should go forward with a letter. There's been a number of concerns brought forward, and Chris, you always do such a thorough job of making sure that we're very well informed and taking everything into account. I guess we'll start with Richard Romero. Do you have questions or comments? Where are you with this?
The only thing I would probably say is what would be the remedy for, aside financially, from the present landowners? Should they go ahead with this and, to get approval to proceed? Do we have any stake in that, or just?
I'm sorry, what was that? Like, do we have any stake in?
Yeah, if they were given permission to take stuff off-site and proceed with the project, despite our letters.
Yep, so I can answer that. So, let's just say they say, we're going to remove all that material in DEP. You got a site that's got a solid waste violation. We're going to remove it from the site. That doesn't exempt from air, be it noise and dust. So, and they still have to bring it to an appropriate facility. So if you're bringing it to a facility in Massachusetts, we're still worried. If you're bringing it to a site, in Dartmouth, we don't want to see coated or painted going to a site in Dartmouth that might, have a permit.
True.
And then even if they removed all that 60,000 from the site, we're still going to be concerned with, at least, the open release site status and what's in the ground. If they were burying beer, did they bury anything else?
Okay. All right, understood. Thank you.
Anything else?
No.
Okay. Susan Marie.
I don't have any questions at this time.
Thank you. Okay. So then, I guess to my fellow board members, is there anything, so again, Chris laid out the solid waste. I'm certainly concerned about the noise and air quality. I think that was one of my first thoughts, especially with lead, even before anyone mentioned it. I'm always very concerned about lead, just from personal experience. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. There certainly isn't anything that, Chris, you've already included that I would want excluded. Is there anything that we can think of that we want to be examined further or included in this letter that isn't already?
No, not anything additional for me.
Can you think of anything else? No? Okay.
I think it was very thorough.
Chris?
So, a member of the public did mention about the safety. And I mentioned earlier about the division of the town. DPW is sewer, our roadways, our water, distribution system. And it talks, in Mass General laws, where we have a really broad statute, and it talks about public health and safety. But I don't really believe that, it means that we're public safety. Public safety does, fire, police. I do agree that there should be a concern of a town body about the ponds and children. So I will carry that message internally. And I would just put it to the board, if no other department mentions that, do you want me to? Is part of your consideration if we're going to write a letter.
Our department does manage pool safety, correct? So drownings, especially with children, they're not out of our purview, correct? So it wouldn't be inappropriate to mention it.
Correct.
I think that that's certainly considerable, and if anyone else mentions it, we are another voice added in, correct? Then I would say yes. Is there any opposed to adding that?
I would say yes myself.
Okay. And then I think it sounds like we are in agreement that we need to go forward with this letter. Chris, can you tell us, what do you think is going to be the most effective way to send this as far as who signs it? Can you counsel us on that?
I think if it comes from the board, doesn't look like it's happening just by me in a silo. So it can come from the board. And would put it on the board's letterhead, present that to the select board that's compiling all of the department requests to then do a bulk submittal.
Okay. And that is something possible for you and your agents to do within this amount of time. That's a reasonable thing to do.
I've begun to kind of just plot out a draft letter.
Doesn't surprise me.
And that I can kind of cut and paste out of. If there's anything in there that the board doesn't want mentioned, then I can certainly remove.
Okay. I think at this time, there isn't anything that you've already laid out for us that we want excluded. And I think the added bit about drowning, because again, that is in our purview, and the ponds and children should be added. I would request that. I'm going to quickly look over my notes to make sure that there isn't anything else that I wrote down that I don't want to forget. Okay. So then at this time, is there any further discussion from my board members?
Not at this time.
I'm going to need to abstain from the letter due to potential conflict of interest within a butter.
Thank you. Chris, do you need this as a motion, or is it, can we just direct you to perform this action?
If the board's signatures are going to appear on it, then it should be by a vote.
Great, okay. So then finding all of the concerns laid out clearly by Chris Michaud and by all of the member of the public that attended tonight, thank you. I move to direct our agents of the Board of Health to draft a letter to the Mass Housing outlaying all of the concerns we have discussed both in writing and asked to be added. Can I have a second?
I second the motion.
All right, and now we will vote. Richard Romero, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Susan Murray, how do you vote?
I abstain.
And Emily Michelle Olmstead votes yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Let me find my agenda. We can move on to the next item. And Chris, I do apologize. I realized as someone was speaking that I skipped over the soil board nomination. Are we able to jump back to that?
Yes.
Okay. My apologies, folks. This is first time being a chair, and I already have messed it up. So for reorganization of the board, we did not select a representative to the soil board. So I'll make this as a point of discussion before we begin. I have been the soil board representative. It's just an annual meeting. I'm happy to do it again. I am a soil evaluator in the state of Massachusetts. But with that said, if there's someone else who wants to be the soil soil board member, I don't have to take it. Would either of you prefer to be that?
No, how would I vote?
We won't vote. I guess it's just discussion. If you both are okay with it, I'll nominate myself.
I'm okay.
Excellent. All right. So I move to nominate myself, Emily Michelle Olmstead, as the representative to the soil board.
I second the motion.
Excellent. Richard Romero, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Susan Murray, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Emily Michelle Olmstead votes yes. Okay. Thank you. All right, so new business item B, which is the minutes of March 26, 2025. I did not have any corrections. Oh, Donna? Yes, yes. If we could move discussion out into the hallway so that way there's not too much chatter, it'll be easier to hear. Thank you. So for the minutes of March 26, 2025, I do not believe I had any corrections. Richard, I'll look to you because you were the other member who was on.
Nope, there's no corrections that I saw.
Okay, so then I will move to approve the Board of Health minutes of March 26, 2025. Can I have a second?
I second the motion.
All right. And then Richard Romero, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Susan Murray, how do you vote?
I abstain.
And Emily Michelle Olmsted votes yes. All right, and for new business, item C, which is the Board of Health meeting schedule for May of 2025. Chris, do you have a time, a suggested week or thoughts on this?
Thank you. So, just trying to keep us within a 28-day cycle, which, today is a Wednesday. That would put us to May 7th. So, but we don't have to necessarily meet on that day. So, Monday, the Tuesday, or the Wednesday, so the 5th, 6th, or 7th, if possible.
I guess the first question we'll ask is, do folks like this approximate 4 o'clock timeline, 4:15? And I guess I'll briefly pause. Do we have a reason to believe that we would have to meet in person?
That's at the leisure of the board. At this point in time, the governor did extend the remote meeting option.
Okay, great, thank you. I'll say personally, I find the remote considerably easier, but I understand that there are benefits to it, and certainly we could take it as a case-by-case basis, where if it makes sense to have an in-person, we could do that, or we could do hybrid, if my other board members are amenable to that.
For the next board, I can do remote. That'll be great.
Great, yeah. So then, looking at Monday, May 5th, Tuesday, May 6th, or Wednesday, May 7th, I have a preference for Monday or Wednesday and not Tuesday, and in the afternoons, but I don't know how are you folks on that?
The 7th would be ideal for me.
Wednesday, the 7th, what time?
Anytime after 4 o'clock would be great.
After 4? And Susan Murray?
I could do that.
Okay. So then should we aim for 4 o'clock on Wednesday, May 7th, remote meeting? Is that all right? Excellent.
Yes,
Thank you.
works for me.
Okay. We don't need a motion for that. No. Okay. So now we're going to move on to section 2, appointments. We're going to go to the 4:30 appointment, which is the public hearing with, I apologize if I mess up this name, Jonata Ferreira, plot 158, lot 19 at 105 Old Westport Road, Dartmouth, which is the domestic animal permit request for the following: 2 small-hoofed animals, 1 rooster, 12 chickens, hens/game birds. I apologize if someone is here and has been waiting. I appreciate your patience.
So I just,
Oh.
this is Janine Simmons. She's from the Finance Committee.
Oh.
And our liaison on the Finance Committee.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So it does not appear that we have anyone in the room for this permit. Chris, would you like to give us a summary or tell us about this, please?
Sure, thank you. So they have requested to include goats on the permit, but they do not have the goats at this time, nor do they have the enclosure. So what I would ask the board to consider in acting upon this application would be to condition any approval upon inspection of the fence prior to any goats being brought to the property, and also to condition the permit to August 1st, so that we can evaluate and make sure that it doesn't conflict with any of the neighbors. And that's all.
Thank you. I'm going to find my notes for a minute. I'll open it up to my other board members. Richard Romero, do you have questions or comments?
No, you said August 1st was the date?
Please.
Okay.
Okay. And Susan Marie, do you have questions or comments?
Yeah, just, I want to clarify the address. When I went to look, there was no 105. And that plot number is 101 and 101A. I just want to make sure we get the right address.
Did I read it incorrectly?
It's on here as 105, but I went to look it up to see where it is, to look at like traffic, and there's no 105 that I could find Old Westport Road. When I look up the
map.
the plat number and lot number, it's actually, the address is 101 and 101A. I didn't know, maybe there's another house in there, but.
Yeah, I am familiar with that property, and there is something unique about that property with the division of the buildings, so that might have something to do with it. But what we do have, because actually, it's interesting, because they put 105, but when we, look it up by the town's map geo, which isn't always steadfast, it has it as 101 Old Westport Road. And the map and the lot match. So it's got something to do with probably a mailing address of the, there's a couple different units on that property, so.
And then just so I fully understand, they can't get animals till August? Is that?
Nope, so what I've asked to consider is that we have the ability to inspect the fence before they put the animals,
Yes.
just to make sure that doesn't present a public safety issue. And then if they hurried up and put the fence up next week, then they would have the animals until August 1st. And if everything is great, great. If the big concern is roosters. Occasionally we get someone that thinks they're putting up the right fence, they've never had animals before, and we end up with this chronic situation of loose animals. So that's why I've been asking the board to condition for the time frame so that we can bring the situation back and have a firmer discussion, or allow the board, to possibly resolve the issue without renewing the permit, to say, we don't want to be in conflict with the neighborhood if your animals are running loose, and we don't get into the whole protracted revocation process. And so far, it's worked out, I believe, pretty well, because it sets off a serious tone, and that, we want you to have, enjoy having the animals, but we want to make sure that it's done in a manner that doesn't create conflict.
And then my only other question is, I noticed, I think this is the one that they wanted to build a 4-foot fence, and I would just ask that they, I don't know how this works, but, the breed of goat really matters. If they're getting Nigerians,
Yeah, 4 feet
sure.
would be overkill for dwarf Nigerians.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
if they're gonna get a larger breed, that's not
A Nubian,
tall enough, yeah.
yeah.
I don't know if the animal control can help advise in those situations.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, we had a tabled matter at the last meeting, and it was just about that. It was about the suitability and, discussion on electric fencing actually being needed, because cows, when they're young, they're like pole vaulters, going over fences.
So then, Chris, you had named the requesting recommending the condition that if we as a board choose to approve this, that one of the conditions that the fence be inspected before any goats brought into the property. Would it make sense to also add to that that the applicant has to consult with the Dartmouth Animal Control? Would that appease you?
I'm not sure we need to make that a stipulation, but let them know that there's knowledge there that they can tap into. Not making assumptions whether the person, maybe they're goats.
Fair enough.
Absolutely, yeah. She's a resource and has a lot of knowledge, so absolutely.
Great. And then, are there any other questions or comments you had, Susan?
Not for me.
No? Okay. I think the roosters, because I know that that's always, that is a concern, but it sounds like because of that conditioning to August 1st, 2025, that would allow any complaints to come forward and we could address them at that time, correct?
Staff can address them, but we can address them in a much more serious tone, against the permit.
Right.
In statement.
Great. Thank you. Okay. All right. And I should say this for our new member. I try and I was advised by someone who's much more senior than me, who's been serving on Board of Health for many, many years, that it's good for us to have a finding with our motions, because then it shows that we as a board have deliberated. Even if, I hate to say it, even if our findings were somehow incorrect, but again, it shows that we're not being arbitrary and capricious. So Richard knows from working on a board with me, I like to have findings for why we are voting the way that we are, or why, if I make a motion, I am moving the way that I am. So would someone else like to make a motion? I know I make a lot of them. I'm also happy to.
I'm not quite there yet. So.
Sure, and by all means. All right, well, I'll give it a go, and we can certainly amend it. So finding that there are some concerns about the goats, but that we are going to address it in the conditions, and that we have had success with conditional permits for a timeline regarding roosters. I move to approve the animal permit for Plat 158, Lot 19 at that address, 105 Old Westport Road in Dartmouth, with the following conditions: that the fence must be inspected before any goats are brought to the property, and that the permit is conditional to August 1st, 2025. Do I have a second?
I second the motion.
Thank you. All right, now we vote. Richard Romero, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Susan Murray, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Emily Michelle Olmsted votes yes. Great. All right, and it is now past 4:32. It is the public hearing with Anthony Bernardini, Plat 23, Lot 6 at 197 Horse Neck Road in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, a domestic animal permit request for the following: 2 small-hooved animals, 4 chicken hens, game birds. Again, I do not see anyone else in the audience who has not already been previously identified, unless you wish to speak on this matter. So, Chris, can you please give us a summary?
Sure, thank you. So this, I had to ask when I saw this application, because it is the most thorough application I have ever seen. And that was not done by town staff, that was done by the applicant. So, it's comforting to see so much detail. They are still in the process of constructing the fence from when we were last out there. So I would just ask for the same consideration on this permit, to condition it, if the board is so moved to approve, to require the inspection, so that we can make recommendations early on if need be, and also to have that August 1st.
Okay.
Chris, when you say inspection, do you mean specifically of the fence or of the entire property?
Nope, just the enclosure for the animals.
Great, thank you. All right, Richard Mara, do you have any questions or comments?
No, I do not.
Thank you. Okay, Susan Murray, do you have any questions or comments?
Just the same comment as earlier with the size of the fence. And I only do that because I want to see people be successful with their animals, not, any other concern, but I want I want it to be a success from the start.
For sure. It sounds like you know more about goats than I do. Thank you. Okay. So, finding that the applicant has done a very thorough job at looking at the details, and that there are no other concerns expressed about this property, I move to approve the animal permit for Plat 23, Lot 6 at 197 Horse Neck Road in Dartmouth, with the following conditions: that there be an inspection of the fence before the animals are brought onto the property, and that the permit is conditional to August 1st, 2025. Can I have a second?
I second the motion.
Excellent. And we're going to vote. Richard Romero, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Susan Murray, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Emily Michelle Olmsted votes yes. Okay. So now we're moving on to section 4, which is any item not known 48 hours in advance. It is informational. Chris, do you have anything to add or state at this time?
The only thing I'll just note, it's just informational, no discussions on it, is that Mass DEP did release their ADU guidance. ADU is accessory dwelling unit, so the governor, part of the housing plan, wants more housing units in Massachusetts. So ultimately, there was a law that recently got passed that allows, by right, accessory dwelling units as an attempt to create more housing in Massachusetts. 48% of Dartmouth are residential properties that have septic systems, so that guidance is important because a lot of people have come down asking us about these ADUs, and then when we give them the bad news that you still have to address Title V, these significant expenses like, this guidance from Mass DEP reinforces that yes, Title V still applies, and if you're going to add a bedroom or 2 bedrooms in an ADU, you then have to have a compliant septic system. And in some cases, you may have to, redo your whole system if it's a non-conforming system. A non-conforming system is a system that was built prior to the 1995 edition of the code. It has to be in full compliance. So that's it.
Thank you. All right, it is 5:46. I will move to adjourn the Dartmouth Board of Health. Can I have a second?
Second the motion?
All right, and now we vote. Richard Romero, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Susan Murray, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
And Emily Michelle Olmsted votes yes. Thank you.